What would you do if the patient you were caring for suddenly opened his eyes after months in a coma, and the first person he saw was you, and in that single moment, your entire world shifted, because something impossible was happening right before your eyes, and you knew nothing would ever be the same again, because this was not just any patient waking up. This was something far more mysterious, and the hospital walls were hiding secrets that would change everything you thought you knew about life and death and the thin line between them. Anna Monroe stood outside the heavy oak door of Dr. Harris' office, and her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. And she had no idea why she had been summoned here on this ordinary Tuesday morning when she was supposed to be doing her regular rounds on the third floor with the elderly patients who needed their medications and their vitals checked. But instead, there was this urgent message that had come through the nurses' station telling her to report to the head of neurology immediately, and Anna was just a young nurse barely 2 years into her career at Westbridge Private Hospital, and she had never been called to meet with someone as important as Dr. Harris before, and her mind was racing through every possible mistake she might have made in the past few weeks. But she could not think of anything serious enough to warrant this kind of summons, and her hand trembled slightly as she raised it to knock on the door, and she heard Dr. Harris' deep voice telling her to come in, and she pushed the door open and stepped inside the spacious office with its walls lined with medical books and certificates and degrees that spoke of decades of experience and expertise. Dr. Daum Harris was sitting behind his massive desk, and he looked up at her with an expression that was hard to read, and Anna felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. But then he gestured for her to sit down in one of the leather chairs across from him, and his voice was surprisingly gentle when he spoke. And he said, "Anna, thank you for coming on such short notice, and I know you must be wondering why I asked to see you." And Anna nodded, because she could not trust her voice to remain steady if she tried to speak. And Dr. Harris leaned back in his chair, and he seemed to be choosing his words carefully. And he said, "I have a special case that I need to discuss with you, and it involves a patient who has been with us for quite some time now. And his name is Grant Morrison, and he has been in a coma for the past 8 months following a severe car accident, and we have been monitoring him closely. But there has been very little change in his condition until recently." Anna felt a strange flutter in her chest at the mention of this patient, and she had heard whispers about Grant Morrison in the hospital corridors, because long-term coma patients always became part of the hospital folklore in a way, and the staff would talk about them during breaks and wonder if they would ever wake up, or if their families would eventually make the difficult decision to let them go. And Anna had never actually seen Grant Morrison or been assigned to his care. But now Dr. Harris was telling her that things were changing, and there had been some unusual brain activity detected in the most recent scans, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic that something significant might be about to happen. And Dr. Harris wanted Anna to be assigned as Grant's primary nurse for the next few shifts, because she had shown exceptional dedication and compassion in her work, and he believed she would be the right person to be there, if and when Grant woke up. Anna was stunned by this responsibility, and she felt both honored and terrified, because caring for a coma patient who might be on the verge of waking up was completely different from her usual duties, and she would need to be vigilant and attentive to every small sign of change. And she asked Dr. Harris what exactly he expected from her, and he explained that she would need to monitor Grant's vitals constantly and look for any signs of consciousness, such as eye movement or response to stimuli, and she would need to keep detailed records of everything she observed, and most importantly, she would need to be ready to call for the medical team immediately if Grant showed any signs of waking up, because those first moments would be critical for his recovery and his future. Anna left Dr. Harris' office with her mind spinning, and she made her way to the private wing of the hospital where the long-term care patients were housed, and it was quieter here than in the bustling main wards, and the lighting was softer, and there was a sense of timelessness in these corridors where patients existed in a state between life and death. And Anna found room 428, and she took a deep breath before entering. And when she pushed open the door, she saw Grant Morrison for the first time, and he was lying in the hospital bed surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed softly, and there were tubes and wires connecting him to various monitors and IV drips, and his face was peaceful, almost serene, and he looked younger than she had expected, maybe in his early 30s, and he had dark hair that had grown longer during his months in the coma, and there was a shadow of beard on his jaw. And Anna felt an unexpected pang of emotion as she looked at him, because here was a person whose life had been suspended in this terrible way, and she wondered what kind of man he had been before the accident, and whether he had family and friends who visited him, and what dreams might be trapped inside his unconscious mind. She approached the bed, slowly, and checked all the monitors and made notes on his chart, and everything seemed stable. And she pulled up a chair beside the bed and settled in for what she knew would be a long shift. And the hours passed quietly, and Anna found herself talking softly to Grant, even though she knew he probably could not hear her. But she had read that coma patients sometimes retained some level of awareness, and that familiar voices and sounds could help them find their way back to consciousness. And so, she told him about the weather outside, and about the flowers that were blooming in the hospital gardens, and about the little everyday things that made up normal life, and she found it strangely comforting to talk to him, even though he never responded days. Turned into a week, and Anna fell into a routine with Grant. And she arrived each morning and checked his vitals and talked to him and read to him from books and magazines. And she played soft music sometimes because she thought it might help, and she noticed small things like the way his breathing would sometimes change rhythm, or the way his fingers would occasionally twitch. And she documented everything meticulously and reported to Dr. Harris regularly, and the doctor seemed pleased with her dedication, and he told her that the brain activity was continuing to increase, and they were hopeful that a breakthrough might come soon. Then one afternoon during Anna's shift, something changed, and she was standing beside Grant's bed, adjusting his pillow, when she noticed his eyelids flutter, and at first she thought it was just another involuntary muscle spasm like she had seen before. But then it happened again, and this time it was more pronounced, and his eyes were moving beneath his closed lids like he was dreaming, and Anna felt her heart start to race, and she leaned closer and softly called his name, and she said, "Grant, can you hear me?" And for a moment nothing happened, and she was about to step back, when suddenly his eyes opened. It was the most shocking moment of Anna's life, and she stood frozen, staring into Grant's eyes, which were a deep brown, and they were unfocused, at first wandering around the room like he did not know where he was, and then his gaze landed on her face, and he seemed to be trying to make sense of what he was seeing, and his lips moved, but no sound came out, and Anna could see the confusion and vulnerability in his expression, and she realized he was completely disoriented, and probably terrified, and she wanted to reassure him, but she was so stunned that for a few seconds she could not move or speak. Then, reality crashed back, and Anna remembered what Dr. Harris had told her about calling for help immediately, and she turned to reach for the emergency call button, but in her shock and haste, she bumped into the small table beside the bed, and the basin of water that had been sitting there went flying, and it crashed to the floor with a loud clatter, and water splashed everywhere, and the sound seemed to echo through the quiet room, and Anna felt her face flush with embarrassment, even as her fingers found the emergency button, and she pressed it hard, and the alarm began to sound, its urgent beeping filling the corridor outside. Within seconds she heard the pounding of feet, and the door burst open, and nurses and doctors came rushing in, led by Dr. Harris himself, and they swarmed around Grant's bed, and Anna stepped back to give them room, and she was shaking from the adrenaline and the shock of what had just happened. And Dr. Harris was talking to Grant in a calm, steady voice, and he was checking his responses and his reflexes, and the other doctors were adjusting monitors and checking vitals. And there was a controlled chaos to the scene that was both frightening and exhilarating. Anna watched from her position near the wall, and she could not take her eyes off Grant, and he was looking around at all the faces surrounding him, and she could see the fear in his eyes, and she wanted to go to him and tell him everything would be okay. But she knew she needed to let the doctors do their work. And Dr. Harris was asking Grant simple questions like, "What is your name? And do you know where you are?" And Grant was trying to respond, but his voice was weak and hoarse from months of disuse, and Anna could barely hear what he was saying. But she saw Dr. Harris nod and smile, and that seemed like a good sign. The medical team worked quickly and efficiently, and after what felt like hours, but was probably only about 20 minutes, things began to calm down, and the immediate crisis had passed, and Grant was stable and conscious, though clearly exhausted and confused. And Dr. Harris finally turned to look at Anna, and he had a strange expression on his face, and he said, "Anna, you did well, and thank you for calling us immediately." And Anna nodded, and she felt a wave of relief wash over her, because she had been worried that she had somehow messed things up by dropping the basin and making such a commotion. But Dr. Harris did not seem concerned about that. Over the next few hours, Anna stayed in the room while the doctors continued to assess Grant, and they explained to him what had happened, and told him about the accident and the coma. And Anna watched his face as he processed this information, and she saw shock and disbelief and grief pass across his features, and she knew he was trying to come to terms with the fact that 8 months of his life had simply vanished, and she could not imagine how terrifying that must be. And later, when most of the medical team had left, and it was just Anna and one other nurse in the room, Grant turned his head and looked directly at her, and their eyes met. And Anna felt something shift inside her chest. And it was not romantic or anything like that, but it was a connection and a recognition. And she realized that she had been with him during one of the most vulnerable moments of his life, and that created a bond, whether she understood it or not. In the days that followed, Anna continued to care for Grant as he began the long process of recovery, and his muscles were weak from months of inactivity, and he needed physical therapy to regain his strength, and his speech was slow at first, but improved rapidly, and Anna was there through it all, and she helped him with simple tasks, like eating and drinking, and she encouraged him when he got frustrated with how difficult everything was, and she celebrated with him when he achieved small victories like sitting up on his own or taking a few steps with assistance. But as Grant grew stronger, Anna began to notice strange things, and sometimes he would look at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable, and he would ask her questions about herself and about her life and about things that seemed oddly specific, and once he asked her if she believed in fate, and she laughed, nervously, and said she did not know, and he just nodded, like her answer confirmed something he had been thinking. And there were moments when Anna would catch him staring at her, when he thought she was not looking, and she started to feel like there was something he was not telling her, and something important that he was keeping hidden. One evening when Anna was finishing her shift and preparing to leave, Grant called her over to his bedside, and his voice was serious, and he said, "Anna, I need to tell you something." And she felt a flutter of nervousness, but she sat down in the chair beside him and waited. And he was quiet for a moment, like he was gathering his courage. And then he said, "I have been having memories, but they are not my memories." And Anna frowned and asked him what he meant, and he said, "While I was in the coma, I was not just unconscious, and I was somewhere else, and I was experiencing things and seeing things, and some of those things were about you." Anna felt a chill run down her spine, and she did not know what to say. And Grant continued, and he said, "I know. This sounds crazy. And I know you probably think I am still confused from waking up. But I am telling you the truth. And while I was in that coma, I saw moments from your life, and I saw you as a child, and I saw you in nursing school, and I saw you making the decision to work here at this hospital." And Anna was staring at him with her mouth slightly open, because this was impossible, and there was no way he could know any of those things, and she had never met him before he was in the coma. And yet when he described specific details like the blue dress she had worn to her nursing school graduation and the way she had cried when her grandmother died when she was 12 years old, Anna felt her rational mind struggling to find an explanation. She asked him how he could possibly know these things, and Grant shook his head and said he did not know. And all he knew was that during the coma, he had been connected to something larger than himself, and he had experienced what felt like other people's lives and other people's memories. and Anna's life had been the clearest and the most persistent. And he had watched her growing up and making choices and becoming the person she was today. And when he finally woke up and saw her standing there beside his bed, he had recognized her immediately, and that was why he had been staring at her with such intensity, because he felt like he knew her, even though logically that made no sense. Anna did not know whether to believe him or to think he was experiencing some kind of neurological side effect from the coma, and she told him she needed to think about what he had said, and she left, the room feeling shaken and confused. And over the next few days, she tried to maintain a professional distance from Grant. But it was difficult, because every time she looked at him, she thought about what he had told her, and she wondered if it could possibly be true, and she started to notice other strange things, like the way Grant seemed to know what she was going to say before she said it, or the way he would sometimes reference things from her past that she had never mentioned to anyone. Anna began to do some research on her own, and she read articles about near-death experiences and coma patients who reported unusual phenomena, and she learned about theories of consciousness that suggested the mind might be capable of things that science did not yet fully understand. And the more she read, the more she realized that there were many documented cases of people who had experienced things that should have been impossible, and she started to think that maybe Grant was telling the truth, and maybe his coma had connected him to her in some inexplicable way. But accepting this possibility meant accepting that everything she thought she knew about reality was incomplete. And it meant opening herself up to ideas that seemed to belong in science fiction, rather than in the sterile, rational world of medicine. And Anna was torn between her training, which told her to look for logical explanations, and her intuition, which whispered that something extraordinary was happening. And she realized she needed to talk to someone about this. And so she went to Dr. Harris, and she told him everything that Grant had said, and she expected him to dismiss it as post-coma confusion. But instead, Dr. Harris listened carefully, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then Dr. Harris told her something that surprised her, and he said, "Anna, there have always been mysteries in medicine, and things we cannot explain. And I have been a doctor for over 30 years, and I have seen things that challenge everything I learned in medical school. And the truth is, we still know very little about consciousness and about what happens to the mind when the body is in extreme states, like coma. And I am not saying I can explain what Grant experienced, but I am also not saying it is impossible. And sometimes we have to accept that there are things beyond our current understanding." And he advised Anna to keep an open mind and to continue caring for Grant professionally, while also paying attention to what she was feeling and experiencing. Anna left Dr. Harris' office feeling both validated and even more confused, and she returned to Grant's room and found him sitting up in bed looking out the window, and when he heard her come in, he turned and smiled, and there was a warmth in his expression that made Anna's heart ache, and she sat down, and they talked for a long time, and Grant told her more about his experience during the coma, and he described it as being in a vast space filled with threads of light, and each thread was a life and a consciousness, and he had been able to move along these threads and experience fragments of other people's existences, and Anna's thread had been the brightest and the most compelling, and he had been drawn to it again and again, and he said he felt like he had been meant to find her, and that his coma had not been just a tragedy, but also a gift, because it had led him to her. Anna listened, and she felt tears welling up in her eyes because there was something profoundly moving about what Grant was describing, and whether it was real or a beautiful delusion, it spoke to a longing that existed in all human hearts, and the longing to be connected, and to be known, and to matter to someone else. And she realized that over the past weeks, she had come to care about Grant deeply, and not just as a nurse caring for a patient, but as one human being connecting with another. And she did not know what this meant for her future, or how their relationship would evolve, but she knew that something significant had happened, and that her life had been changed by this experience. As Grant's recovery progressed, he regained more of his strength and independence, and the physical therapy helped him rebuild his muscles, and soon he was able to walk on his own, and his speech returned to normal, and the doctors were amazed by how well he was doing, and they said it was a remarkable recovery, and Grant attributed much of his progress to Anna, and to the care and encouragement she had given him, and their bond grew deeper, and they spent hours talking about everything from philosophy to favorite movies, and Anna learned that Grant had been a successful architect before the accident, and that he had been driving home from a late-night work session when his car had been hit by a drunk driver, and his previous life had been filled with creativity and ambition, but also with a certain loneliness because he had been so focused on his career that he had neglected his personal relationships. The accident and the coma had given Grant a new perspective on what mattered in life, and he told Anna that he felt like he had been given a second chance and he wanted to use it wisely, and he wanted to build connections with people and to create meaningful experiences rather than just accumulating professional achievements. And Anna found herself opening up to him in ways she had not opened up to anyone in years, and she told him about her own struggles and her fears about whether she was good enough as a nurse, and her doubts about whether she was making a real difference in people's lives. And Grant listened with genuine interest and empathy, and he told her that she had made an enormous difference in his life, and that he would be forever grateful to her. Eventually the day came when Grant was ready to be discharged from the hospital, and Anna felt a mixture of happiness for him and sadness for herself, because she knew she would miss seeing him every day. And on his last morning at Westbridge Private Hospital, Grant asked if he could speak to Anna privately, and they went to the small visitors' lounge at the end of the corridor, and Grant took her hands in his, and he looked into her eyes, and he said, "Anna, I need to tell you something important, and I know this is complicated because of how we met, and because of everything that has happened, but I have feelings for you, and not just gratitude, but real deep feelings. And I think about you all the time. And I believe that the connection we share is special, and maybe even meant to be." Anna felt her heart pounding, and she had known this moment was coming, but she had not been prepared for how it would make her feel, and she cared about Grant deeply. But she was also afraid because relationships that started in such unusual circumstances often did not last in the real world, and she told him honestly that she felt the connection too, but that she needed time to process everything and to figure out what it meant. And Grant nodded and said he understood, and he would wait as long as she needed, and he gave her his phone number and his address and told her to contact him when she was ready. The weeks after Grant left the hospital were strange for Anna, and she went back to her normal routine, but everything felt different, and she found herself thinking about him constantly, and wondering what he was doing and whether he was thinking about her too. And she talked to her friends about the situation, but they gave her conflicting advice, and some said she should pursue the relationship, because life was short, and she should follow her heart, and others warned her that she was projecting emotions onto a patient, and that the relationship could not be healthy given how it had started, and Anna was torn, and she did not know what to do. Then one evening, Anna was walking through the hospital gardens during her break, and she saw a familiar figure sitting on one of the benches, and it was Grant, and her heart leapt, and she walked over to him and asked what he was doing there, and he smiled sheepishly and said he had been hoping to run into her, and he admitted that he had been coming to the hospital gardens every few days at the time, when he knew she usually took her break, and he said he had not wanted to pressure her by calling, but he could not stay away completely, and Anna felt a warmth spread through her chest, and she sat down beside him, and they talked for a while, and the conversation flowed easily like no time had passed, and Anna realized that what she felt was real, and that it had nothing to do with the hospital or the unusual circumstances of their meeting, and it was about the person Grant was, and the way he made her feel seen and understood. Anna made a decision in that moment, and she told Grant that she wanted to give their relationship a chance, and his face lit up with joy, and he pulled her into a gentle hug, and Anna felt a sense of rightness that she had not felt in a long time. And over the following months, they dated and they took things slowly, and they got to know each other outside the context of the hospital, and Anna met Grant's friends and family and learned more about his life before the accident, and Grant met Anna's family and friends, and they all liked him and could see how happy he made her. But the mystery of Grant's coma experience never fully went away. And sometimes late at night when they were lying together, Grant would tell Anna about other things he had seen during those 8 months, and other lives he had touched, and other stories he had witnessed, and Anna would listen, with wonder and occasionally with skepticism, but always with an open heart. And she came to believe that whether it was real in a literal sense, or whether it was something her mind had created to cope with trauma, it had brought them together, and that was what mattered. A year after Grant woke from his coma, he and Anna got engaged, and they planned a small wedding in the hospital gardens at Westbridge Private Hospital, because that was where their story had truly begun. And Dr. Harris agreed to attend, and many of the nurses and doctors who had been part of Grant's care team came to celebrate with them. And during the ceremony, Grant spoke about how the accident had taken 8 months of his life, but had also given him everything that mattered. And he looked at Anna with such love and gratitude that there was not a dry eye in the audience. Anna, in her wedding dress, stood beside this man who had come back from the edge of death and who had somehow known her before he truly knew her, and she thought about all the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this moment, and she realized that life was far more mysterious and beautiful than she had ever imagined, and that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories began in the most unexpected ways. And as they exchanged their vows, Anna felt a profound sense of peace and purpose, and she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, bound by a connection that transcended normal understanding. Years later, when Anna thought back on that afternoon, when Grant had first opened his eyes and looked at her with recognition and confusion and vulnerability, she still felt the same sense of awe and wonder, and she never found a scientific explanation for what Grant had experienced during his coma, and she never stopped questioning whether it had been real or imagined. But ultimately she decided that it did not matter, because the love they shared was real, and the life they built together was real, and sometimes the greatest mysteries were not meant to be solved, but simply to be lived and cherished. And Anna lived the rest of her life with gratitude for the unexpected summons that had changed everything, and for the patient who woke up and recognized her soul.